Beauty comes from within. That's what Luna's dying mother whispered as she placed the silver pendant around her daughter's neck. But when you become a hideous monster cursed by the woman who should have loved you, you learn that the world only sees the beast, and what they saw would make even the strongest alpha run in terror. Luna Silverwood had always lived in the shadow of perfection. At 18, she possessed the kind of unremarkable features that made people look through her, rather than at her muzzy brown hair that refused to hold a curl, pale skin dotted with freckles, and a too thin frame that seemed to disappear beneath her hand-me-down dresses, while her stepsister Serafina commanded every room with golden hair that caught sunlight like spun silk and curves that made grown alphas stammer. Luna had learned to find her worth in quieter gifts. She could read the ancient werewolf texts that made scholars' eyes cross with strain. Wild animals calmed at her touch, sensing something pure in her that even she didn't understand. When the pack children had nightmares, they sought Luna's gentle voice to chase away the darkness. But in a world where beauty determined worth, where marriage alliances secured pack futures, Luna's gifts felt as invisible as she was. Poor Luna, bless her heart, the pack mothers would whisper behind cupped hands. But looks aren't everything, though they certainly help when it comes to finding a mate. The words cut deeper each time, a constant reminder that she was the consolation prize no one wanted to claim. Even her own father, Alpha Marcus Silverwood, seemed to forget she existed when Serafina entered a room. His eyes would light up with pride as suitors lined up to court his golden daughter, while Luna received absent pats on the head and distracted murmurs about her sweet disposition. But it was Vivienne Blackthorne, her stepmother, who perfected the art of cruelty disguised as concern. Once a renowned beauty herself, Vivienne had aged into the kind of woman who hoarded power like precious stones, terrified of losing what little influence she had left. Her compliments to Luna always carried poison at their core. "Oh darling, don't look so glum," Vivienne would coo, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Not everyone can be blessed with Serafina's gifts, but you have other qualities." The pause before other qualities always lingered too long, leaving Luna to wonder if she possessed any qualities worth mentioning at all. She'd learned to smile and nod, to play the grateful stepdaughter, who appreciated such thoughtful observations. Inside, though, her heart was slowly freezing over, building walls against the constant rejection. Then came the announcement that changed everything. The Alpha King would choose his mate from the unmarried daughters of the 5 most powerful packs. Luna's name appeared on the invitation alongside Serafina's, a formality that made everyone in the pack exchange knowing glances. They all understood that Luna was merely the required second daughter, present to fulfill protocol, while Serafina captured the king's heart. For the first time in her life, Luna dared to hope, maybe, just maybe, someone would finally see past her plain exterior to the depths beneath. Maybe the Alpha King would value intelligence over beauty, kindness over perfection. Maybe her moment had finally come. If stories of hidden strength and impossible love make your heart race like they do mine, hit subscribe and join thousands who believe true worth can never be destroyed. Chapter 1. The night everything changed. The celebration feast buzzed with excitement and nervous energy. Tomorrow, both Silverwood daughters would depart for the Crystal Palace, where the Alpha King would hold court and choose his queen. The great hall overflowed with well-wishers, though Luna noticed how their congratulations focused entirely on Serafina, while she received pitying smiles and patronizing encouragement. Serafina glowed like a goddess in her sapphire gown, accepting praise and marriage predictions with the graceful confidence of someone who'd never doubted her own worth. She was everything a future Luna Queen should be: beautiful, poised, connected to all the right families. Even Luna had to admit her stepsister looked magnificent. "You clean up nicely," Serafina had said earlier, giving Luna's simple green dress a once-over. "Very appropriate for your station." Luna had chosen to take it as a compliment, though the backhanded nature stung like always. Tonight she was determined to focus on possibility rather than past hurts. Tomorrow could be the beginning of everything she'd ever dreamed of. As the evening wound down, Vivienne approached with an ornate crystal goblet filled with deep red wine. Her expression held an unusual warmth, almost maternal, which should have been Luna's first warning. "My dear child," Vivienne said, her voice honey-sweet, "I wanted to give you something special before your great journey. This wine belonged to your dear mother. She saved it for your most important day. She made me promise to share it with you when you needed her blessing most." Luna's heart clenched at the mention of her mother, Elena Silverwood, who died when Luna was barely 5. Any connection to that gentle woman felt precious beyond measure. The goblet felt warm in her hands, almost pulsing with its own energy. "Your mother wanted you to have this," Vivienne continued, pressing the goblet closer to Luna's lips. "Drink deep, my child, and let her love flow through you. Let it give you the confidence you'll need at court." Luna raised the goblet with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the gesture. For once, Vivienne seemed genuinely caring, genuinely invested in Luna's success. Maybe she'd misjudged her stepmother all these years. Maybe this was a sign that everything was about to change. The wine burned like liquid fire down her throat, nothing like the smooth vintage she'd expected. It scorched her esophagus and ignited her stomach with searing heat. Luna doubled over, gasping, as the goblet shattered on the stone floor. "What's wrong with her?" someone called out, but their voice sounded distant, distorted, as if coming from underwater. The burning spread outward from her core, racing through her veins like molten silver. Luna's bones began to crack, with sickening pops that echoed through the suddenly quiet hall. She screamed, but the sound emerged as an inhuman howl that sent guests scrambling backward in terror. Her spine elongated with grinding agony, forcing her to her hands and knees as her dress tore along the seams. Coarse, silver-tipped fur erupted from her skin in painful patches, while scales emerged along her arms in jagged lines. Her face pushed forward into a wolf-like muzzle, teeth sharpening into razor points that cut her own tongue. The worst part wasn't the physical agony, it was the mental clarity. Luna's human consciousness remained completely intact, trapped within the monstrous form, aware of every horrifying change, and helpless to stop it. She watched her family's faces transform from concern to disgust to pure terror. "What is that thing?" Serafina shrieked, pressing herself against the far wall. "Where's Luna? What happened to Luna?" "Remove this creature from my sight," Alpha Marcus roared, his voice breaking with what might have been grief or revulsion. Guards rushed forward with silver-tipped spears, and Luna's heart shattered as she realized her own father was ordering her destruction. Vivienne stood frozen in apparent shock, her hand pressed to her throat in perfectly performed horror. "Oh my stars! Some terrible curse has taken our dear Luna. How could this happen?" But Luna caught something else in her stepmother's eyes. A flash of satisfaction so brief others might have missed it. In that moment, Luna understood the truth. This was no accident. This was murder disguised as tragedy, a cold-blooded elimination of an inconvenient stepdaughter. The silver pendant her mother had left her burned against her chest, the only part of her human life that seemed to respond to her transformed state. It pulsed with warm light, as if trying to remind her of something important, something she couldn't quite grasp through the haze of pain and betrayal. Time was running out. The carriages to the Crystal Palace would depart at dawn, and Luna was supposed to be on one of them. Instead, she was being hunted in her own home, treated like a rabid animal that needed to be put down for everyone's safety. With a howl of anguish that shattered windows and sent servants fleeing in terror, Luna crashed through the great doors and disappeared into the night. Behind her, she heard Vivienne's voice rise above the chaos. Poor child, taken by darkness just when her dreams might have come true. "We'll have to tell the Alpha King that Luna died tragically before the trials could begin." The carriage wheels would roll toward the palace in mere hours, carrying Serafina to her destiny, while Luna became nothing more than a cautionary tale, whispered in the shadows. But as the silver pendant continued to pulse against her monstrous heart, Luna made a vow that transcended her current form. Somehow, someway, she would expose the truth and claim what was rightfully hers. Chapter 2. Life in the Shadows. The forest became Luna's prison and sanctuary, in equal measure. For weeks, she survived like the beast everyone believed her to be, drinking from crystal streams, sleeping in hidden caves, and learning to hunt with senses that were no longer entirely human. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd gained incredible strength, speed, and supernatural awareness, just as she'd lost everything that made life worth living. Other wolves, both natural and supernatural, rejected her as an abomination. She was too human to run with wild packs, too monstrous to approach werewolf communities. The few times she'd tried to communicate, her attempts at speech emerged as terrifying growls that sent potential allies fleeing in panic. I tried to speak, to explain, to beg for understanding, Luna would think during the long, lonely nights. But all that emerged were sounds that made children cry, and grown men reach for weapons. The worst moments came when she encountered humans in need, a lost child wandering too close to dangerous territory, tourists who'd strayed from marked paths, elderly travelers whose carriages had broken down in predator territory. Luna's heart compelled her to help, but her appearance ensured that every rescue became a traumatic encounter for those she saved. She'd guide the lost child safely back to the village outskirts, only to watch in heartbreak as the little girl screamed about the monster in the woods that had terrorized her. She'd drive away genuine threats, bears, rogue wolves, bandits, only to have grateful victims turn to horror when they saw their protector's true form. The newspapers that occasionally drifted into her territory carried stories of a demon beast stalking the borderlands, blamed for everything from missing livestock to crop failures. Luna realized, with growing despair, that she'd become the boogeyman parents used to frighten children into obedience. Yet she couldn't stop helping. It was the only thread connecting her to the person she'd once been, the only proof that humanity still existed within her monstrous shell. Even when it brought nothing but pain, she continued to protect those who would destroy her without hesitation if they knew her identity. The silver pendant remained her constant companion, warming whenever she performed acts of kindness, and pulsing with mysterious energy during the full moon. Sometimes she caught herself talking to it, pretending her mother's spirit could hear her desperate pleas for guidance. "I don't understand what you wanted me to learn from this," she'd whisper, touching the warm metal. "I don't understand why I'm still alive, when everything I was is gone." News of the outside world reached her in fragments, overheard conversations from traders, abandoned newspapers, gossip from villages she watched from the shadows. The Alpha King's mate trials were proceeding, with Seraphina emerging as the clear favorite. Society pages praised her beauty and grace, speculating about royal wedding plans that made Luna's stomach twist with bitter longing. Most painful were the mentions of her own supposed death. Tragic Luna Silverwood, taken by a curse just days before her opportunity at the palace. The stories painted her as a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly fate could steal away young dreams. No one questioned the convenient timing of her transformation. No one investigated Vivienne's tearful accounts of that terrible night. Luna had become a ghost, haunting the edges of a world that had already forgotten her existence. But ghosts, she was learning, had their own kind of power. They could observe without being seen, gather information without being suspected, and plan revenge without anyone knowing they still existed. The Alpha King grew impatient with his search. According to whispered rumors, he'd extended the trials longer than tradition demanded, as if waiting for something or someone that never appeared. Time was running out for all of them, and Luna realized she faced an impossible choice: remain safely hidden in exile, or risk everything to reclaim a destiny that might have been lost the moment Vivienne's poisoned wine touched her lips. As she stared up at the full moon that seemed to call to something deep in her transformed soul, Luna made her decision. If she was to be a monster, she would be one with purpose. If the world had forgotten Luna Silverwood, then maybe it was time to remind them exactly what they had lost. The journey to the Crystal Palace would be dangerous, potentially fatal, and almost certainly futile. But living as a coward in the shadows was a fate worse than death. Tomorrow she would begin the most important hunt of her life, not for prey, but for justice, truth, and the chance to prove that worth couldn't be destroyed by curses or cruelty. Chapter 3. The Palace Infiltration. Luna reached the Crystal Palace under cover of a new moon, when shadows ran deepest, and her monstrous form could blend into the darkness. The massive structure rose like a jeweled mountain against the starlit sky, its towers gleaming with supernatural light that made her silver pendant pulse in response. Somewhere within those walls, the Alpha King was making his final choice, and Luna had perhaps days, maybe hours, before her last chance disappeared forever. Getting inside required every skill she'd developed during her weeks of exile. The servant quarters bustled with activity even at midnight, preparing for the grand announcement ceremony. Luna wrapped herself in a stolen cloak, hood pulled low enough to hide her wolf-like features, and slipped through the kitchen entrance during a shift change. "New girl," the head cook barked without looking up from his preparations. About time they sent more help. "Take the night cleaning detail. 3rd floor guest wings. Stay quiet. The candidates need their rest." Luna nodded wordlessly and melted into the shadows of the servant corridors. The irony struck her that she'd infiltrated the most secure werewolf stronghold in the kingdom by pretending to be exactly what she'd always been: invisible, forgettable, beneath notice. The palace hummed with supernatural energy that made her transformed senses real. Ancient wards pulsed through the walls, and she could smell the power radiating from dozens of Alpha-born nobles. But underneath it all, she detected something else, a scent of loneliness and burden that seemed to emanate from the highest tower. Working the night shifts allowed Luna to map the palace layout, while avoiding the crowds that gathered during day hours. She learned which passages connected the royal quarters, which servants could be trusted with secrets, and most importantly, where the mate trials were being conducted. From hidden alcoves and servant passages, she watched Serafina glide through the palace, like she'd been born for this life. Her stepsister had grown even more beautiful during their separation, if such a thing were possible, commanding attention from every alpha prince and noble son in attendance. She wore confidence like expensive perfume, absolutely certain of her inevitable victory. Vivienne had accompanied Serafina as her sponsor, playing the grieving stepmother with Academy Award precision. Luna listened to her tell the tragic tale of dear Luna's curse to anyone who would listen, always with perfectly timed tears and theatrical sighs. "She was such a sweet child," Vivienne would say, dabbing at dry eyes with silk handkerchiefs. "If only we could have saved her from that terrible darkness." She would have been so happy to see Serafina's success. The lies made Luna's claws extend involuntarily, and she had to bite her own tongue to keep from growling loud enough to expose her position. But watching Vivienne's performance also revealed crucial information. Her stepmother was nervous, constantly glancing toward the shadows, as if expecting threats to emerge. Then Luna caught her first glimpse of Alpha King Kieran, and her breath caught in her throat. He wasn't what she'd expected. Rather than the brutal warrior or pampered prince her imagination had conjured, Kieran moved with quiet authority that spoke of strength held carefully in check. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples, despite his relatively young age, he possessed the kind of rugged handsomeness that came from bearing real responsibility. But it was his eyes that captured Luna's attention. Deep amber that held layers of intelligence, sorrow, and something that looked almost like longing. When he thought no one was watching, his shoulders would sag slightly, as if the weight of his crown had grown too heavy to bear. Luna found herself studying him from the servant galleries, fascinated by the contrast between his public persona and private moments. With the mate candidates, he was polite but distant, going through the motions of courtship without any real engagement. When interacting with servants and guards, though, genuine warmth crept into his voice. Late one night, she discovered him alone in the royal library, surrounded by ancient texts and scrolls. The books were written in the old tongue, the sacred werewolf language that most modern alphas couldn't read. But Luna recognized the texts immediately. They were treatises on curses, supernatural transformations, and blood magic. Interesting reading for a king, she thought, pressing closer to the hidden passage that allowed her to observe undetected. Kieran's face was drawn with exhaustion, and something that looked like desperation. He made notes in careful script, occasionally pressing his palm against his chest, as if fighting some internal pain. Whatever burden he carried, it went far deeper than the responsibility of choosing a mate. The final revelation came when he spoke aloud to the empty library, his voice carrying clearly to Luna's hiding place. "Mother, if your blood magic truly runs in these veins, then show me a sign. Show me someone who sees past the crown to the man trapped beneath." Luna's silver pendant flared with sudden heat, responding to something in his words that her conscious mind couldn't grasp. The reaction was strong enough that she had to muffle a gasp, pressing herself deeper into the shadows to avoid discovery. But Kieran had noticed something. His head turned toward her hiding spot, amber eyes searching the darkness with supernatural intensity. For a moment, Luna was certain he'd spotted her, earnest that her infiltration was about to end in capture and execution. Instead, his expression softened with something that might have been hope. "I know someone is there," he said quietly. "I've sensed you in the shadows for days now. You don't feel like a threat, more like a kindred spirit. If you're listening, know that I understand what it means to hide your true self from the world." Luna's heart hammered against her ribs, torn between the desperate urge to reveal herself and the certainty that doing so would mean death. Kieran waited in the silence, giving her the choice to emerge or remain hidden. When she stayed in the shadows, he nodded with what looked like understanding, rather than disappointment. "When you're ready," he said, returning to his books, "I'll be here." The next morning brought the announcement that stunned the entire palace. The Alpha King would host one final challenge, a test of wisdom and courage that would determine his bride. Any unmarried woman could participate, regardless of pack status or previous elimination. Luna realized with crystalline clarity that this was her moment, her last, impossible chance to step out of the shadows and claim her destiny. But doing so would mean revealing her monstrous form to the entire court, facing almost certain death for the slim possibility that someone might finally see her true worth. As she watched servants scramble to prepare for the challenge, Luna touched her mother's pendant and felt its warm response. Elena Silverwood had died believing her daughter possessed hidden strength that would someday shine like starlight. Maybe it was time to test whether a mother's faith could survive even the cruelest curses. Chapter 4. The Final Trial. The Great Hall had been transformed into an arena of judgment, with crystalline chandeliers casting rainbow light across marble floors, polished to mirror brightness. Representatives from every major pack filled the galleries, their conversations creating a low buzz of anticipation that made Luna's enhanced hearing ache. She crouched in the servant passages above the hall, watching through a carved screen as the remaining mate candidates assembled below. Seraphina stood among them like a golden goddess, radiating confidence that bordered on arrogance. The other women were equally stunning, each one representing the finest bloodlines in the werewolf kingdom. Alpha King Kieran entered with ceremony befitting his station, but Luna's sharp eyes caught the tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze swept the hidden corners of the room, as if searching for someone specific. When his amber eyes paused near her hiding spot, her silver pendant grew warm against her chest. "Ladies of noble blood," Kieran announced, his voice carrying easily through the vast space, "you have shown grace, beauty, and intelligence throughout these trials, but a Luna Queen must possess qualities that cannot be measured by conventional standards. Today's challenge will test not your knowledge or accomplishments, but your character when faced with impossible choices." A collective intake of breath whispered through the assembled crowd. This wasn't what anyone had expected for a final mate selection. "Before you lies an ancient riddle," Kieran continued, gesturing to a silver tablet that servants wheeled into the center of the hall. "It has remained unsolved for 3 centuries, though many scholars have tried. The woman who provides the answer will prove herself worthy to rule beside me." But more importantly, his voice dropped, carrying undertones that made Luna's spine tingle. "She will prove she possesses the wisdom to break curses that have plagued our kind since the old magic still ran wild." Luna's breath caught. She knew this riddle, had studied it in her mother's ancient texts, spending long nights puzzling over the cryptic words until their meaning finally revealed itself. It was a test not just of intelligence, but of understanding werewolf nature at its most fundamental level. The contestants approached the tablet one by one, reading the inscription carved in the old tongue. Most shook their heads immediately, unable to even translate the archaic language. Those who could read it spent long minutes in obvious confusion, eventually offering guesses that made Kieran's expression grow progressively more disappointed. Serafina was among the last to try, and Luna held her breath as her stepsister studied the riddle with furrowed brow. Serafina had never shown interest in ancient lore, preferring social accomplishments to scholarly pursuits. After several minutes, she offered an answer that was eloquent but completely wrong. "I'm afraid not," Kieran said gently, and Luna caught something that might have been relief in his voice. When the last contestant failed, murmurs of confusion rippled through the audience. Kieran raised his hand for silence, his gaze once again searching the shadows where Luna hid. "Perhaps," he said with careful emphasis, "the answer lies not among those who seek the crown, but among those who understand that true worth often hides in unexpected places." Luna's hands trembled as she realized what he was offering, an invitation to reveal herself, a chance to prove her value despite her monstrous form. But stepping into that hall meant exposing herself to hundreds of witnesses, facing almost certain death for the slim possibility of being understood. The riddle echoed in her mind. What calls to the moon but casts no shadow, bears royal blood but claims no throne, breaks every chain but remains bound, and finds its mate in the one who sees beyond the beast? The answer was as clear as starlight. A cursed soul whose true nobility transcends physical form, who sacrifices everything for love, and who can only be freed by someone who values character over appearance. It was describing Luna herself, as if her mother had somehow foreseen this moment decades ago. Before fear could change her mind, Luna pushed open the hidden panel and stepped into the light. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Screams echoed through the hall as nobles scrambled backward in terror. Guards rushed forward with weapons drawn, and Luna heard Serafina shriek, "Kill that abomination before it destroys us all." But Kieran raised his hand, halting the guards' advance. "Wait," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. Luna stood frozen in the center of the hall, her monstrous form fully revealed under the blazing chandeliers. Coarse fur and silver scales caught the light in ways that emphasized rather than concealed her horrific transformation. Her wolf-like muzzle and razor teeth made speech nearly impossible, but her human eyes held all the intelligence and pain of the last terrible weeks. Luna's fully exposed, ready to die for what's right. And if you're feeling that same electric anticipation for what happens next, smash that subscribe button because the revelations coming will change everything. "You're cursed, aren't you?" Kieran said quietly, approaching without fear while everyone else pressed themselves against the walls. Luna managed a jerky nod, fighting to form words that emerged as barely comprehensible growls. "Your eyes," Kieran continued, moving close enough that only she could hear his words. "They hold intelligence and pain I recognize. I've spent years studying curses like yours, hoping to understand." He paused, then said something that sent shockwaves through Luna's transformed heart. "You know the answer to the riddle." It wasn't a question. Somehow, impossibly, he had recognized her worth despite her appearance, had seen past the monster to the woman trapped within. Luna's voice cracked as she forced out the words in the old tongue, each syllable a struggle against her altered vocal cords. "A cursed soul, whose nobility transcends form, bound by love, freed by recognition." Kieran's eyes widened with something that looked like wonder. "You understand," he breathed. "You truly understand what it means to bear invisible chains." But before Luna could respond, Vivienne's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "That creature lies," her stepmother shrieked, pushing through the crowd with wild desperation. "It's a monster sent to destroy us all. Kill it before it spreads its curse." Luna turned toward Vivienne, seeing terror in her stepmother's eyes for the first time. Terror. And something else. The recognition of failure. Whatever plan Vivienne had set in motion was crumbling around her, and Luna finally understood that her transformation had been just the beginning of a much larger scheme. As guards hesitated between their king's command to wait and a noblewoman's demand for action, Luna realized this moment would determine everything, not just her own fate, but the future of everyone she'd ever cared about. The truth was finally within reach, but claiming it would require courage she wasn't sure she possessed. The silver pendant burned against her chest, pulsing with power that seemed to whisper of ancient promises and royal bloodlines. Her mother's final gift was trying to tell her something crucial, if only she could understand the message in time. Chapter 5. Revelations in Blood and Silver. Lady Blackthorn. Kieran's voice cut through Vivienne's hysterical demands with steel-edged authority. You seem remarkably eager to see this creature destroyed. One might wonder why a grieving stepmother would be so invested in preventing conversation with a cursed being. Vivienne's face went white as bone, but she recovered quickly. Your Majesty, surely you don't believe this abomination has any connection to my poor deceased Luna. The very suggestion dishonors my stepdaughter's memory. But Kieran was no longer looking at Vivienne. His attention focused entirely on Luna, amber eyes studying her with an intensity that made her silver pendant flare with sudden light. The jewelry's glow was bright enough to make several nobles gasp and step back further. That pendant, Kieran said softly, recognition dawning in his voice. It bears the moon goddess seal. I haven't seen one in. Elena Silverwood wore such a pendant. She was the last of the royal bloodline, married into a lesser pack for love rather than politics. Luna's transformed vocal cords allowed only growls and harsh whispers, but she managed to force out words that silenced the entire hall. Her mother's last gift. The admission sent ripples of shock through the assembled nobles. Vivienne's mask of grief finally cracked, revealing the calculating desperation beneath. Impossible, she hissed. Luna Silverwood is dead. I watched the curse consume her with my own eyes. This monster is an imposter, using tragedy to deceive our king. But Kieran had moved closer to Luna, studying her monstrous features with growing certainty rather than revulsion. The bone structure is still there, he murmured, tracing the air near her wolf-like face without touching. And the eyes, Luna Silverwood had distinctive green eyes, flecked with gold, just like these. Luna's heart hammered as she realized Kieran had not only recognized her worth, he was recognizing her identity. Somehow, impossible as it seemed, he was seeing through her curse to the woman trapped beneath. You're Luna, he said with quiet conviction. The question is, what really happened that night? Before Luna could attempt an answer, Seraphina's voice broke through the tense silence. That's impossible. Luna was my sister. I would know her anywhere. This thing is nothing like her. Your stepsister, Kieran corrected with pointed emphasis. And you're right. She's nothing like the meek girl described in your family's reports. She's far stronger. The admission hung in the air like a challenge, and Luna felt something shift in the crowd's attention. Instead of seeing only a monster, some of the assembled nobles were beginning to look curious, even sympathetic. Vivienne must have sensed the changing mood because her desperation escalated to panic. Even if this creature was once Luna, which I don't believe for an instant, she's clearly been corrupted by dark magic. She's dangerous to everyone here. The only danger, came a new voice from the gallery, is to those who traffic in blood curses and false grief. All eyes turned toward the speaker, an elderly woman in scholar's robes, who descended to the main floor with stately grace. Luna didn't recognize her, but Kieran's face brightened with relief. Master Thorn, he said, your timing is impeccable. Have you completed your research? Indeed, Your Majesty. The woman's steely gaze fixed on Vivienne, with unmistakable accusation. Lady Vivienne Blackthorn, also known as Vivienne Darkwood, also known as Vera Nightshade, wanted by 3 kingdoms for curse weaving, blood theft, and the systematic elimination of royal bloodlines. Vivienne took a step backward, but found her path blocked by palace guards who had quietly surrounded her position. That's ridiculous. I'm a grieving mother. You're a centuries-old witch, Master Thorn replied calmly. who specializes in stealing the life force of young women to maintain your own artificial youth. Your pattern is consistent. Marry into noble families, corrupt or eliminate the daughters, and drain their supernatural essence for your own use. Luna felt pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Vivienne's preserved beauty despite her supposed age, her stepmother's constant subtle cruelties, designed to wear down Luna's confidence, and most damning of all, the blessing wine that had triggered her transformation. The curse wasn't meant to transform you, Kieran said, understanding dawning in his voice as he looked at Luna. It was meant to kill you slowly, while she siphoned your royal blood's power. But something went wrong. Luna's hand moved instinctively to her mother's pendant, which pulsed with warm light at Kieran's words. Through tremendous effort, she managed to whisper, "Mother's protection, still strong." Alina Silverwood was the last pure moon goddess descendant, Master Thorn confirmed. Her blood carried protections that couldn't be easily overcome. The killing curse backfired, creating transformation instead of death. Vivienne's composure finally shattered completely. "You know nothing," she snarled, her voice dropping to inhuman registers. That little mouse was supposed to die quietly, leaving her power to flow where it belonged. Instead, she became this abomination that threatens everything I've worked for. The confession echoed through the silent hall, damning and undeniable. Even Serafina looked stunned, staring at the woman who had raised her with dawning horror. "Stepmother," Serafina whispered. "You killed Luna?" "I tried to," Vivienne shrieked, abandoning all pretense, "just like I killed her simpering mother before her. The Silverwood line should have ended decades ago, but Elena's brat refused to die properly." Luna felt something break and reshape within her chest. Not her ribs this time, but the cage around her heart that had held back fury for so long. Her voice, when it came, was clearer than it had been since the curse took hold. "You murdered my mother for her bloodline. You tried to murder me for the same reason, and you would have let Serafina become queen, while draining her life force in secret." Serafina's gasp of horror was audible throughout the hall. "What does she mean, drain my life force?" Master Thorn's expression was grim. "Vivienne needed you to gain access to the royal line, but once established as Queen Mother, she would have slowly killed you too. Your beauty, your vitality, your supernatural gifts, all would have been transferred to her through blood magic." The revelation sent Serafina stumbling backward, finally understanding that she had been as much a victim as Luna, just in different ways. Her golden perfection had made her the ideal puppet, while Luna's perceived plainness had made her the expendable sacrifice. Kieran stepped forward, his authority filling the space like thunder. "Vivienne Blackthorn, you stand accused of murder, blood theft, curse work, and treason against the crown. How do you answer?" But Vivienne was already changing, her human mask dissolving to reveal something ancient and terrible beneath. Her skin took on a gray, mottled appearance. Her eyes turned completely black, and her fingernails extended into razor-sharp claws. "I answer with power that predates your little kingdom," she hissed, dark energy crackling around her form. "If I cannot have the Silverwood bloodline, then I'll destroy it entirely." She lunged toward Luna with inhuman speed, claws aimed at her heart. But Luna was no longer the helpless girl who had been poisoned weeks ago. Her time in exile had taught her to fight, to survive, to protect herself and others. More importantly, her mother's pendant was blazing with silver fire that seemed to burn away the fog that had clouded her mind since the transformation. As Vivienne's claws met Luna's defensive stance, both women were engulfed in light that made the chandeliers seem dim by comparison. The final battle for Luna's soul, her identity, and her future was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Breaking of Chains. The light from Luna's pendant didn't just illuminate the Great Hall, it transformed it into something approaching sacred space. Ancient werewolf magic stirred in response, power that had been dormant for centuries, awakening to answer Luna's desperate need. Vivienne's claws met not vulnerable flesh, but a barrier of silver fire that burned with the fury of ancestral protection. The witch shrieked as the light seared her corrupted form, forcing her to retreat several steps. "Impossible," she snarled, her true form now fully revealed, ancient, twisted, sustained by stolen life force, for far longer than any natural being should exist. That bloodline power should have been mine. But Luna was changing too, the pendant's energy flowing through her cursed form like molten starlight. For the first time since her transformation, she felt her voice return with crystal clarity. "It was never yours to take," Luna said, rising to her full height as power coursed through her monstrous frame, "and it never will be." The assembled nobles watched in stunned silence as the two women circled each other, one representing corruption and theft, the other embodying protection and righteous fury. But this wasn't just a battle between Luna and Vivienne. It was a confrontation between the old magic's intended purpose and its perversion. Kieran moved to join the fight, but Luna's voice stopped him. "No, this is mine to finish." She understood now what her mother's pendant had been trying to tell her all these weeks. The curse hadn't been a punishment or a random cruelty. It had been a test, a trial by fire that would either destroy her completely or forge her into something powerful enough to stand against ancient evil. Vivienne launched herself forward again, dark magic swirling around her like poisonous smoke. But Luna met her charge with newfound strength, silver light blazing from every scale and patch of fur. Where their powers collided, reality itself seemed to crack and reshape. "You think you can defeat me, little mouse?" Vivienne hissed as they grappled, her claws leaving bloody furrows on Luna's arms. "I've consumed dozens of your kind. Their power flows in my veins." "And that," Luna replied with grim satisfaction, "is exactly why you're going to lose." The pendant flared brighter, and suddenly Luna could feel them. Maya, all the women Vivienne had murdered over the centuries, their stolen essence, trapped within the witch's corrupted form. They were crying out for justice, for release, for the chance to finally rest. Luna pressed her transformed hands against Vivienne's chest and called to them with her mother's royal blood. "Sisters, you are free. Take back what was stolen, and find your peace." The effect was catastrophic for Vivienne. Dozens of life forces erupted from her body like escaping light, each one carrying away a portion of her artificial power. She aged decades in seconds, her preserved beauty cracking like old parchment. "No," she screamed, trying desperately to reclaim the escaping energy. "I need their strength. Without it, I'll die." "Then die," Luna said simply, and meant it. Vivienne made one final, desperate lunge, channeling the last of her stolen power into claws aimed at Luna's heart. But she had forgotten about the other person in this confrontation, who had been touched by ancient magic. Kieran stepped forward, his own power blazing as he caught Vivienne's wrist inches from Luna's chest. "You're not the only one carrying curses, witch." Luna saw it then, the mark on Kieran's neck that pulsed with dark energy, the death curse that was slowly killing him. But instead of using his remaining life force to preserve himself, he was channeling it to protect her. "Kieran, no," she cried, understanding what he was about to do. "Together," he said, his amber eyes meeting hers with absolute trust. "Break both our chains at once." Luna nodded, understanding flooding through her. Their curses were connected, hers born from Vivienne's hatred, his inherited from ancient blood magic that demanded royal sacrifice. But connected curses could be broken together if the bond between the cursed was strong enough. Luna grasped Kieran's free hand while he held Vivienne immobilized. Silver and gold light erupted from their joined palms, power that was greater than the sum of their individual magic. The pendant's warmth spread through both of them, carrying Luna's mother's love and protection to encompass them both. Vivienne's scream pierced the air as the combined power tore through her like cleansing fire. Centuries of stolen life force finally broke free, and without that artificial sustenance, her ancient form crumbled to dust that sparkled briefly in the silver light before disappearing entirely. The silence that followed felt sacred, heavy with the weight of justice finally served. Luna looked down at her hands and gasped. The coarse fur was receding, scales fading, her wolf-like features shifting back toward human proportions. But the transformation wasn't just returning her to what she'd been before. She was becoming something new, something that incorporated both her human heart and the strength she'd gained during her trials. Kieran's mark was fading too, the death curse unraveling like smoke in the wind. He looked younger somehow, as if a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "The curses," he said wonderingly, flexing his fingers as vitality flowed back into his frame. "They're actually broken." Luna touched her face, finding smooth skin instead of fur, human features instead of a muzzle, but her eyes still held flecks of silver that spoke of supernatural sight, and her strength remained far greater than any ordinary woman's. She had been refined by fire, not merely restored. Around them, the great hall erupted in amazed chatter as nobles processed what they'd just witnessed. But Luna only had eyes for Kieran, who was looking at her with wonder and something that might have been love. "You're beautiful," he said softly, reaching up to touch her face with gentle fingers. "You always were, but now the world can finally see it." Seraphina's voice cut through their moment. "Luna, is it really you?" Luna turned toward her stepsister, seeing genuine remorse and horror in Seraphina's perfect features. "Yes," she said simply, "it's really me." "I'm so sorry," Seraphina whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I had no idea what she was, what she'd done to you, to Mother. I thought she loved us." "She was incapable of love," Luna replied. "Finding forgiveness came easier than she'd expected. She used us both, in different ways, but that's over now." Master Thorn approached, her scholarly robes rustling with quiet authority. "Your Majesty," she said to Kieran, "the mate trials have concluded in a most unexpected fashion." Kieran looked at Luna, his expression serious despite the warmth in his eyes. "Indeed they have, though I believe the choice was made long before tonight." He dropped to one knee before her, taking her hands in both of his. The assembled nobles gasped at the unprecedented gesture, an Alpha King kneeling before anyone was beyond shocking. "Luna Silverwood," Kieran said, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned hall, "you have shown more courage, wisdom, and nobility than anyone I've ever known. You faced impossible trials, with grace, protected others at cost to yourself, and broke curses that had plagued both our bloodlines. Will you do me the honor of becoming my queen?" Luna looked down at this powerful man kneeling before her, offering her everything she'd ever dreamed of. But more than the crown, more than the recognition or the restoration of her place in society, she saw in his eyes something she'd never expected to find: genuine love for exactly who she was. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I will." The great hall erupted in cheers, but Luna barely heard them. Kieran rose and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around as silver light continued to dance around them like stardust. When he set her down, his lips found hers in a kiss that tasted of hope, justice, and the promise of a future neither of them could have imagined weeks ago. As they broke apart, Luna touched her mother's pendant one last time. The silver was warm but quiet now, its desperate pulsing replaced by a steady glow that spoke of approval and love that transcended death. "I finally understand what you were trying to tell me," she whispered to her mother's memory. "Beauty truly does come from within, but sometimes it takes a monster to teach the world how to see." Chapter 7. Epilogue. The Moon Goddess Queen. 6 months later, Luna stood on the palace balcony overlooking the kingdom she now ruled, watching the full moon rise over mountains that no longer seemed like barriers, but like possibilities waiting to be explored. The silver crown of the moon goddess sat lightly on her dark hair, its ancient stones responding to her bloodline with gentle warmth. She was beautiful now in ways that made poets weep, and artists beg to capture her likeness. But the beauty was different from Seraphina's golden perfection. It carried depth, strength, and the unmistakable mark of someone who had survived hell and emerged victorious. Her eyes still held flecks of silver that spoke of supernatural sight, and her smile carried the hard-won wisdom of someone who understood both cruelty and kindness. "Admiring your domain?" Kieran's voice came from behind her, warm with the contentment of a man who had found his perfect match. "Thinking about changes we still need to make," Luna replied, leaning back against his chest as his arms encircled her. "Master Thorne's research identified 17 other noble houses that might harbor blood witches like Vivienne. We can't let anyone else suffer what we did." "Tomorrow's worries," Kieran murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Tonight is for celebrating." He was right, of course. Tonight marked the 6th anniversary of her mother's death, but instead of mourning, Luna was choosing to celebrate Elena Silverwood's legacy. The palace had become a sanctuary for outcasts and misfits, just as she'd dreamed. Cursed individuals found healing here, rejected young women discovered their worth, and those who had lost hope learned to believe in second chances. Serafina had proven instrumental in these efforts, using her natural charisma and social connections to advocate for the forgotten and overlooked. Her stepsister had never become the queen she'd expected to be, but she'd found something more valuable: the chance to make amends and discover her own purpose beyond external beauty. "The delegation from the Eastern Pax arrives tomorrow," Luna said, checking the mental list that never seemed to end. "They've specifically requested our help with 3 cases of inherited curses." "And you'll help them," Kieran said with certainty. "Because that's who you are. Someone who sees problems and fixes them, who finds the lost and brings them home." Luna smiled, remembering the terrified, hopeless creature she'd been just months ago. That girl would never have believed she could become someone who inspired hope in others, who wielded power not for personal gain, but for justice and protection. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, a question that had lingered in her mind despite their obvious happiness. Choosing the cursed girl over all those perfect candidates. Kieran turned her in his arms so she faced him, amber eyes serious in the moonlight. "Luna, my love, you were never cursed. You were tested, refined, and ultimately revealed as exactly what our kingdom needed. The moon goddess knew what she was doing when she marked you as mine." Before Luna could respond, shouts of celebration rose from the courtyard below. She leaned over the balcony to see what had caused the excitement, and laughed with pure joy. In the gardens below, a young woman was being embraced by family members who had clearly traveled far to reach her. The girl bore the telltale signs of recent curse breaking, the slightly dazed expression, the tears of relief, the way she kept touching her own face, as if to confirm her transformation was real. "Another success story," Kieran observed, pride evident in his voice. "Another sister saved," Luna corrected. "Another family reunited." She watched as palace healers guided the celebration toward the recovery wings, where the newly healed would rest and learn to adjust to their restored lives. It was a scene that played out regularly now, but Luna never tired of witnessing these moments of triumph. The silver pendant at her throat pulsed once with warm light, as if Elena Silverwood was expressing her own joy at seeing her daughter's work. Luna pressed her hand to the jewelry, feeling the connection to her mother's love and the approval that transcended death. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I found my worth, claimed my power, and used it to help others find theirs." A shooting star streaked across the night sky, brilliant silver against the darkness, and Luna chose to interpret it as her mother's final blessing. The terrified girl who had fled into the forest was gone forever, replaced by a queen who ruled with compassion, strength, and the unshakable knowledge that true beauty could never be destroyed by cruelty or circumstance. "Ready for bed, Your Majesty?" Kieran asked, his voice carrying the intimate warmth reserved only for her. Luna took one last look at the kingdom spread below them. Luna, her kingdom, filled with people who looked to her for protection, guidance, and hope. The responsibility was enormous, but she'd learned that strength grew to meet the demands placed upon it. "Ready?" she said, allowing him to lead her toward their chambers. As they walked through halls lined with portraits of previous rulers, Luna's eyes lingered on the newest edition, a painting commissioned to commemorate their wedding day. In the portrait, she and Kieran stood together, crowns gleaming, hands joined in perfect unity. But what made Luna smile every time she saw it was what the artist had captured in her eyes. Not the perfect emptiness of conventional beauty, but the deep, unshakable knowledge of someone who had earned every blessing life had given her. If Luna's transformation from monster to queen touched your soul, subscribe now, because I've got dozens more stories of cursed souls finding impossible love and magic that changes everything. Beauty truly did come from within, and sometimes, as Luna had learned, it took a monster to teach the world how to recognize a queen.